Morning. Thank you all for being here. Today we are celebrating the enactment of Senate Bill 586, the Maryland Mold Protection Act. It is being enacted into law today. This landmark legislation establishes a comprehensive framework to address the widespread issue of mold in residential properties. By setting forth clear guidelines for mold assessment and remediation, the Maryland Tenant Mold Protection Act aims to safeguard public health and enhance living conditions for thousands of residents across the state. The legislation mandates timely responses to mold complaints and remediation action. It ensures that tenants are no longer left to fend for themselves in hazardous environments. Joining us are individuals and organizations who've worked tirelessly and advocated on behalf of Maryland residents to bring this bill to fruition. We have representatives from the industry, such as Sherry Solomon, Esquire, who is president of Clean Health Environmental Company, located in Silver Spring, Maryland. She was also a member of the task force that put forth this legislation. We have attorneys representing us. We have Joseph Lovelace, who is Maryland Legal Aid. We have Albert Turner, who is from Renters United Foundation. We have Zephyr Shaw, who is the Director of Advocacy at Maryland Legal Aid. We have Lisa Sorrow with Community Legal Services. And then we have Tony Pratt, who is a community organizer with People Builders Consultants here in Annapolis, Maryland. What you'll see represented in the stories that you'll hear from the folks who have been advocating is that for far too long, the issue of mold had remained unaddressed with a unified and comprehensive solution here in Maryland. But today we are taking bold and decisive action to address the issue of mold. Stories and reports of conditions where tenants in apartments, dormitories, and housings were living with levels of mold that affect their health and everyday occurrences have become where to my office. We got phone calls from families who were dealing with mold that resulted in rashes on children, kids who are missing school because of occurrences of asthma, families who are missing time from work because of the acute occurrences of asthma, people who had personal properties and keepsake items destroyed because of the mold that was pervasive in their homes. After being contacted by folks for so long, we realized there was time that we should do something about it. This law aims to change the paradigm of residents' difficulties to get the needed assistance from landlords. It also helps landlords understand how to assess the varying mold levels for early intervention before they escalate to critical states. In 2021, the American Housing Survey, reported that approximately 94,000 Maryland rental properties were affected by interior water leakage and 74,000 by exterior water leakage, half of which originated from defective roofing. Of that number, 38,000 rental properties experienced serious and harmful mold conditions. Mold hazards are among the most frequently cited concerns by tenants in rental housing. In 2024, the Maryland Tenant Right to Counsel Project represented over 4,600 cases, with 1/5 involving serious mold conditions, some even requiring hospitalization and long-term care. These cases show that mold in residential rental housing poses a serious and substantial physical, psychological, and economic harm to vulnerable groups such as children, the elderly, and individuals with respiratory illness, including allergies and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. Maryland has over 500,000 children and adults medically diagnosed with asthma. Asthma is the #1 reason children miss days from school, and mold is found to be a major trigger of asthma in people's homes. The CDC reports that societal costs directly correlate to 14.4 missed days of school and 14.2 missed days from work annually due to asthma episodes. In Maryland, the state spends $42.1 million annually on asthma-related hospitalization and double that amount on asthma-related emergency room department visits. Despite Maryland having some of the best healthcare systems in the country, we also face health disparities. Our health is often defined by the condition of the homes we live in, our education, and socioeconomic statuses. Addressing this situation and establishing mold standards is essential to addressing asthma disparities in Maryland, where African American children are hospitalized due to asthma at rates 2.5 times higher than other children. So what are we doing about it? We convened a task force, the Mold Standards and Remediation Work Group, in 2023, comprised of representatives from state health agencies, public industry companies, which focused on researching, detecting mold conditions early, and establishing corrective actions. This research formed the basis of the new law that we are introducing today. These initiatives stem from scientific research aimed at addressing longstanding issues impacting tenants in unhealthy living conditions. The focus will predominantly be on education and maintenance. The key provisions of this new law include 3 specific areas. 1, the state will maintain a website with links to county agencies and public information on mold, newly adopted regulation standards, and educational resources about mold prevention. 2, landlords must give tenants an educational brochure available in English and Spanish prior to moving in, with tenants signing a statement acknowledging receipt that outlines how tenants can prevent mold conditions and report issues before they become health hazards. 3, determining when specific mold conditions arise, the tenants should notify the landlord, who will then follow a prescribed response that is a procedure that's in the statute. It says that landlords must respond within 15 days to perform a mold assessment, and then they must remediate that mold if the assessment requires it within 45 days. So we'll have that 2-step feature. Landlords must perform the mold assessment within 15 days, and then they must remediate within 45 days if they find that their remediation is necessary. What this will do is give tenants the needed relief that they need from mold and provide some clear guidance for our landlords and our tenants. And then the added feature, on or before July 1, 2027, Maryland Department of Environment, Department of Health, Department of Housing, and Department of General Services will adopt regulations establishing new uniform standards for mold assessment and mold remediation, including updating building codes for inspection, operation, and maintenance practices. The new standards and assessments will equip Maryland agencies, landlords, and remediation professionals with the tools they need to prevent emerging mold conditions while safeguarding public health. Today, this new law allows Maryland to join more than 15 other states in the District of Columbia who have already passed legislation regulating the harmful hazards of mold in rental properties. Next, I'd like to invite Zafar Shah from the Public Justice Center. Next, I'd like to invite Albert Turner, who will join us from Renters United and share with us their advocacy on this bill. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Albert Turner. I am a staff attorney with the Public Justice Center, also a representative of Renters United Maryland. One of the most devastating and lasting impacts we see among our clients at the Public Justice Center is a harm caused by mold exposure. The effects can follow families for the rest of their lives. Too often my colleagues and I represent tenants, especially families with children and elderly members, who suffer from chronic coughing, wheezing, and respiratory issues directly tied to mold in their homes. Mold is not just a nuisance, it is a serious health hazard. Across Maryland, far too many renters are exposed to conditions that can trigger asthma, worsen respiratory illnesses, and cause long-term health problems. That is why we are grateful to Senator Henson, Judicial Proceedings Committee, the full Senate, and the broader Annapolis delegation for passing this important mold protection bill. This legislation provides renters and city inspectors with clear, enforceable standards for identifying and assessing mold. It also gives landlords much needed guidance on how to properly recognize and remediate hazardous mold conditions, as well as requires them to inform tenants about mold risks and prevention from the beginning of their lease. Most critically, this bill provides tenants with real recourse. It ensures that mold complaints are taken seriously, addressed promptly, and no longer ignored, so renters aren't left to live in unsafe conditions without support or accountability. For too long, our most vulnerable neighbors have lacked the legal guardrails to report and enforce the removal of harmful mold in their homes. This legislation is a vital step toward correcting that and affirming a simple truth that every Marylander, regardless of income, zip code, race, ethnicity, deserves a safe, healthy place to live. With that, I'll pass it to Tony Strong Pratt from People Builders Consulting.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be standing here as part of this SB 856. It's been a long time coming, and now it's here. SB 856 was so important to myself and the communities that I advocate for and with, because no one should have to live in a sick home and not have the means to move to a healthier place. These homes were and still are making people sick with asthma and children that live in subsidized and public housing at an all-time high. Something needed to be done, and soon. With each call of urgency from tenants, after Tenant, it put more of a fire under me to do all that I could to help then delegate, now senators, bill across the finish line. Timing is everything. The time was now, and Senator Henson never wavered. Slow and steady wins the race, and this is just the beginning. Working with residents to help them find and use their voices has been the best part. Watching Heaven White testify and draw a floor vote made everything that has been done to this point so worth the fight. The bill will help checks and balances to those that will rather continue to ignore the obvious. Unchecked mold can be a killer if we let it, but not on our watch. SB 856 will make sure of that.
Hey, good morning. My name is Zephyr Shaw. I'm the Advocacy Director for Human Right to Housing at Maryland Legal Aid, which is the federally funded legal services provider for the state, serving the most vulnerable, lowest income tenants who are at 125% of poverty guidelines. Since 2022, when Maryland began funding the right to counsel and eviction, we have represented more than 10,000 households in eviction cases. And many of these households had young children, or they were seniors living on Social Security, or renters in public or subsidized housing. And what we know from these clients of ours is that mold is an ever-present hazard. Our clients are sick, and they're also sick and tired of being told that they don't actually have a problem that can be dealt with under the law. In fact, in 2024, among our housing cases in which clients have fallen behind on rent, 41% of our clients were dealing with conditions of mold, water damage, or plumbing leaks. Mold is a significant trigger of asthma and respiratory illness, which keeps our clients out of work, losing their earnings, and their children missing school. SB 856 is a multi-year effort, but we're not done. This is a first step to healthy homes in Maryland, but it's also a firm step to economic justice. The next step in collaboration with our state agency partners like Maryland Department of Environment is to develop the mold assessment and remediation standards by June 1st, 2027. And the input of low-income renters like our clients at Legal Aid will be a key to creating fair standards. We hope that this law puts behind us the days of property managers and judges alike denying repairs and compensation for mold hazards. But that will be a function of how we make the law manifest in court. Legal aid attorneys are already preparing to be aggressive in educating judges and using this law effectively to combat threats to life, health, and safety and win relief for Maryland families. I'm pleased now to turn this over to our colleague at Community Legal Services, Lisa Serro, the Litigation and Advocacy Director.
So good afternoon. I am really thrilled to be here talking about this bill. I know that it was mentioned that then delegate and now Senator Henson has worked on this for a long time, but I know for a fact she has been working on it for longer than her time in elected office. I have worked for years and years in Anne Arundel County, right here in Annapolis, a couple blocks from this building. And along with my colleagues, we have represented hundreds and hundreds of tenants, including right here in Annapolis, who have had extreme issues related to mold. What I'm really excited for about this bill is it puts a structure in place for tenants to be empowered to follow a process for making notification of their problem, and it requires a response. And then it has steps in addition to that if that response is not adequate. That level of empowerment of the tenants is critical to ensuring the health and safety of tenants, particularly those who don't have the wherewithal to up and move out of bad conditions. And I want to share actually a sad story about mold, about a client that my colleagues and I represented right here in Annapolis, not far from where we are right now. This tenant came to us because his apartment was covered in mold. He was suffering from terrible respiratory problems that were putting him in the hospital. We assisted him. It was a struggle, but we assisted him to get moved to another unit where hopefully, we were hopeful that his conditions would improve. To make a long story short, we were crushed to learn about a year later that he had died from complications from mold in his new apartment. So this to me is very real, and it's very real to the people who are living in conditions that before this bill was in place, there really wasn't a clear path for remediating. And so I want to personally thank the Senator for all of her attention to this issue and her incredible tenacity in ensuring that this bill got passed. And it is a first step, but it is a very useful and welcome first step.
Maryland Mold Tenant Protection Act, an important and much needed step towards strengthening consistency and accountability in how mold is addressed across Maryland. For over 25 years, I worked in the field of indoor environmental quality with a focus on mold-related services. My firm, Clean Health Environmental, conducts mold assessments, develops mold remediation protocols, and delivers training and on mold prevention, assessment, and remediation. We also provide training to professionals across the mold assessment and remediation industries. For too long, we've seen inconsistencies in how mold is addressed in rental housing. Despite clear industry protocols developed over the past 2 decades, the absence of statewide standards in Maryland has led to a wide range of practices, some of which diverge from recognized industry protocols and in contradiction to best practices. The Act requirements to establish uniform statewide standards for mold assessment and remediation by 2027 is a critical advancement. We welcome the Maryland Department of Environment's role in creating clear, consistent standards that will bring uniformity on how mold is assessed and remediated. These standards will not only support the professionals in the field, but they will also bring clarity to landlords and tenants alike. We also support the law's focus on resident education. When tenants are informed about mold prevention, common sources, and the proper steps for notifying landlords when they observe suspect mold, it helps streamline communication and prompt timely response. The directive to develop and distribute clear educational materials will be an asset to both renters and landlords. We further applaud the creation of a centralized website offering accessible, easy to understand information on mold, its causes, prevention, and remediation practices. With so much conflicting information available, a state-supported, reliable source will be an invaluable tool for tenants, landlords, and health officials. I'd like to thank Senator Henson, members of the Maryland General Assembly, and Governor Moore for advancing this law. The act lays the groundwork for greater clarity, consistency, and professionalism across the mold industry in Maryland. We are proud to support this effort and look forward to the positive impact it will have on how mold-related issues are addressed statewide. Thank you, and I will now turn it back to Senator Henson.
Thank you. So our goal today is to get the word out. Today is July 1st. The law becomes effective today. So what you've heard from everybody about the two-step process of notifying your landlord if there's mold in your home, the landlord then being required to perform the remediation if there is mold in your home, that is effective today. And we want to get the word out to tenants, get the word out to landlords that that's effective now. And then in the future, in 2027, we will have those standards as well coming from our state agencies. So with that, if there's any questions, anybody here is prepared to take questions. Yes?
Yeah, so it was really great hearing about this bill and all the things and how this is like the first step for legislation. But mold, it can be like super expensive to treat, and in some cases, like the severity can be hard to identify. And so there's always a possibility that like what's being addressed is not as like good as it should be, or it might not be addressed at all. So looking forward into like next steps, how can legislation be improved in order to like maximize like the tenant's ability to have their issues and how things are treated?
That's a great question. When it comes to the cost of remediating mold, we've had some ideas surrounding that in prior legislation. In years past, we had legislation that would provide a tax credit to landlords that did do mold remediation. The tax credit would have provided up to $10,000 if you had up to $10,000 in remediation work performed. That is something I'd be willing to look at in the future, more tax credits or relief for landlords if there is substantial repairs that are needed, because the bill does require the mold remediation and it goes up to addressing the underlying causes for mold remediation. So it may be that if there's a leaking pipe or if there's something that needs to be done that's substantial, we do want the landlords to have the resources that they need to not just get rid of the mold, but to get rid of the source of the water intrusion. Thank you.
Are there specific physical, from a building and rental, location standpoint and health related concerns that would be criteria to start this process?
So in terms of the building specifics, what would happen in the regulations that will be promulgated by our state agencies in 2027, they are gonna take a look at the building and maintenance codes to see if there's needs for an update there, to make sure that if there's needs to add dehumidifiers to the buildings, or if we look at the building envelope and require that we need more ventilation, or that we need less breathability. We don't know what the regulations will come out with, but we do know that they have the ability to hire some consultants and to bring experts in to say, are we doing this with the best practices based on what we now know about the way that air moves through buildings and the way that ventilation works. So I'll be interested to see what they come up with there.
So as far as a renter goes though, is there like certain things that like I cough a lot or I see mold in my bathtub, like are there certain things that allow them to kind of trigger this process to start?
So for the renter, if they see something that they suspect is mold, then that's when they can reach out to the landlord and say, I need a mold assessment because I suspect that it's mold there. So typically it would be something that visibly triggers that. What we're hoping is that the educational component will also educate renters on what is suspected mold and what is not. If there's a growth on the wall, if there's something that looks like mold, giving them that pamphlet of information at the time that they sign their lease will give them the tools that they'll need to be able to look at it. But what we don't want is we don't want people guessing. As you've heard, mold can be very, very dangerous. So we want people to have that relationship with their landlord where they contact them and they get a mold assessment done so that a professional can come out and make the assessment and let them know what they're dealing with.
And that kind of leads me to another question, and you might be better to answer this. What are some of the things that people need to be looking for, both, like looking around their home and then from a health standpoint, like to say, oh, maybe my issue is mold?
Yeah, as I shared, industry standards have been in place for many years, just not in Maryland as far as regulation. And our industry is focused on visible growth, so we're looking for visible growth, and that is how we determine if mold is present. That would start the assessment process. And as Senator Henson shared, the key is the source of the moisture, and that's the real focus, finding that source of the moisture. Once if we identify suspect growth and it's confirmed, to fix that and to remediate the mold.
I have one more. If a landlord does not follow through with remediating the mold, what happens then?
Again, Zephyr Shaw, Maryland Legal Aid, that's really the critical question that our attorneys are discussing at Maryland Legal Aid. How do we make this actionable when a landlord doesn't comply? And the statute itself right now doesn't have what we call private right of action, where a tenant can sue, based on this statute, the landlord to compel compliance. But what we do have as a result of Senate and House leadership's work in 2024 was the passage of the Tenant Safety Act, which improved our habitability laws in Maryland. What we're looking to do in cases where the landlord isn't complying with this new mold law is to assertively use the Tenant Safety Act to bring claims against landlords. And that could look like claims for rent escrow relief, where the court's holding money and incentivizing landlords to comply with the law and remediate according to this new law. Or it could look like money damages, compensation to tenants. And the Tenant Safety Act also included a new procedure where tenants can join together in a multi-plaintiff case. So you might have many tenants from different floors of a building here in Annapolis, for instance, file one case against the landlord and be able to assert that the landlord is in violation of the Tenant Safety Act because they haven't followed the 15 and 45-day procedure in the Mold Tenant Protection Act. So that's what we're going to be looking to do as of today, July 1st.
So this is more of a question about mold, but I saw that there's like a period of 45 days after the inspection where there has to be some sort of treatment for the mold. And so I guess I was wondering how in that period of 45 days, how much can that state become more severe, and what are the health implications for the tenant in that period of time, and then what steps can be taken during that in order to ensure the tenant's health.
So the 45 days is 45 days as a benchmark. It does have some flexibility in there where it says 45 days unless it's not practical. There are some times where the work might require more extensive work that goes beyond 45 days. Let's say you have to order parts or something that requires a longer window than that. But what is great about that section is it requires communication with the tenant. So what we want is for the landlord to be communicating with the tenant, and if it's a situation where the tenant needs more support during that time or conditions are worsening for the tenant, that communication between the landlord and the tenant will result in some relief for the tenant, where they would get opportunities to not have to remain in conditions that were worsening for them. Thank you. Were there any other questions? Thank you all. We appreciate you being here. Thank you. Thank you.